But there seems to be only one question. Are we sure that Adrian Vega was driving that night? Or is it possible that Tony DeLuca, the only other person in the car that night, actually drove the car that hit Cameron Douglas? Now, the prosecution has already talked a lot about Adrian, so let's talk about Tony. We know that Tony is an exchange student who moved here from Italy with only one goal in mind: to get a swimming scholarship to the University of Los Angeles. And tonight in court, we have already heard Tony admit that she would do anything to reach her goal. On April 19, 2012, Tony finally got the chance to prove herself when a scout from the University of Los Angeles attended the meet. And you bet Tony swam her little heart out. But afterwards, no one cared. Miss DeLuca was forced to sit idly by as the scout from her dream school approached my client, Miss DeLuca's host sister, Adrian Vega. Naturally, Adrian was happy, ecstatic even after her meeting with the scout, while Tony was left jealous, angry, and desperate. So who drove home that night? Was it happy Adrian or angry Tony, who recklessly raced down Skyline Drive and plowed into Cameron Douglas? Tonight we will hear exactly what happened from Adrian Vega. She will tell us how she was so excited to call and text her friends and family about her meeting with the scout that she actually thought it would be safer if Tony drove them home. Adrian will tell us how Tony recklessly raced down Skyline Drive and continued to drive even after they felt a bump at the front of the car. Adrian will tell us how she turned to Tony, asked if they hit something, but Tony, silenced by her anger and jealousy, said nothing. And Adrian had no idea that they had just hit someone. Next, we will hear from Aubrey Foss, a member of the Hidden Valley Highlanders swim team, along with both Adrian and Tony. Mr. Foss knows Adrian as a symbol for sportsmanship and honesty. And Aubrey Foss was there the night of April 19th at the swim meet and saw Tony DeLuca standing next to the driver's side door moments before Adrian and Tony's departure. Now, Mr. Foss even has past experience with Tony's reckless driving and habit of running stop signs here in the United States. Next, we will hear from Taylor Berard, who has been Adrian's private swim coach for the last 5 years and knows Adrian as a responsible young woman who routinely stands up for what she believes in, namely Adrian's mother's campaign, Families Against Distracted Driving. And lastly, we will hear from Dallas DeCamp, an eyewitness to the incident that occurred on Skyline and Grand. Mr. DeCamp will tell us that the intersection was so dark and the car was moving so quickly that there is no possible way he could have clearly identified a driver. The prosecution holds the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Adrian Vega was the driver. If it is even a possibility that Adrian was not driving, then she must be found not guilty. Adrian Vega and Tony DeLuca were the only ones in the car that night and are the only ones who can say for sure who was driving. But both are pointing a finger at the other, and that alone is reasonable doubt. I urge you to find Adrian Vega not guilty. Yes, the defense calls Adrian Vega.
Adrian Vega. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and rules of law about competition?
I do.
Please state your first name and spell your last name for the record.
Adrian Vega, V-E-G-A.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Good evening, Ms. Vega.
Good evening.
Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Sure. My name is Adrian Vega. I'm 18 years old and I live in Hidden Valley. I'm currently a senior at Hidden Valley High and a member of the school swim team.
Are you a very active member on the swim team?
Yes, swimming is my life. We have practice every single day, and my dream is to attend ULA and swim on their team. It's one of the most competitive in the country.
Moving on to April 19, 2012. Do you remember where you were that night?
Yes, I was at my school, Hidden Valley High, competing in the state championship qualifier meet.
Did anything happen during the meet?
Well, first of all, our team won, and to make it even better, a scout from ULA was there, and he approached me and gave me a ULA hat and his business card. I was beyond excited. All of my hard work was paying off. And fortunately, it did not seem to go so well for Tony.
Who is Tony?
Tony DeLuca is a foreign exchange student who moved here from Italy and has been living with my family. My dad keeps buying her Chef Boyardee, but I don't even think that's Italian.
Are you and Tony friends?
Well, we were on the team together, and she seems just as passionate for swimming as I am. It's just that once the scout talked to me instead of Tony, Tony seemed upset, so I'm not really sure anymore if we're still friends.
What happened after you spoke with the scout?
Tony and I left to go home.
Ms. Vega, how were you acting when you and Tony left?
Well, I was, again, so excited, and I could not stop going on about how lucky I was and how well I did, and I realize now that I was not being very considerate to Tony, and I do feel bad about that now.
How did you get home that night?
Well, Tony drove most of the way home.
Why did you let Tony drive?
Well, my mom is a huge activist. Her family's against distracted driving, and I knew that I would be texting my friends and family who are out of town at the moment all about the meet and meeting the scout, and I thought it would be safer if Tony drove, but it turned out to be a huge mistake.
Did anything happen during the drive home?
Well, it was pretty tense at first, and it seemed to me like Tony was driving way too fast down Skyline, which is a really twisty road, and so I got pretty nervous at that point.
Did you respond?
Yeah, I tried to assure Tony that she could talk to the scout at a later time.
Dr. Nara, this is hearsay.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
This is going to show effect on the listener and how Tony received this information, how he responded to this information. Were you finished with your answer?
Yes, I just said that I tried to assure her that she could speak to the scout at a later time.
And how did Tony respond?
Not well, it seemed to make her even angrier. She proceeded to grab... Well, she grabbed the hat that the scout had given me off of my head and put it on herself, telling me that I didn't look good in the school's colors, and then grabbed my phone and started to mock me, telling me that I didn't care about anybody but myself.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is going to show both effect on the listener and state of the mind of the declarant, Tony DeLuca.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
I don't see how the state of mind of the declarant is valid in this case.
Your Honor, Tony's state of mind is very relevant in that her state of mind may have affected her testimony given to Officer Wright, since her testimony was given very shortly after this interaction that happened in the car.
It might be helpful if you actually ask a question. I think what went wrong here is there was an objection, and then instead of you asking questions, the witness proceeded to just talk and not necessarily in response to the question. So why don't you just ask the witness a question?
Yes. Ms. Vega, how did you respond to this?
Well, I was annoyed and a little confused. I was just trying to help and make her feel better, and so I tried to get my hat and phone back, and during that commotion I felt a bump.
Ms. Vega, at this point, were you aware that Tony had hit something?
No, I was not aware. It was really dark out and everything happened really fast, but I even asked Tony just to be sure, and Tony didn't even say anything. So no, at that point I was not aware.
What happened next?
Well, I was pretty frazzled by our argument, and I was no longer comfortable with